Here's what's coming up on The World today. Residents flee Ukraine's eastern city of Slovyansk as Russian forces advance. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson vows to fight on despite new wave of resignations from government ministers over his leadership. Suspect charged with 7 counts of murder over 4th of July shooting in Chicago. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Tenyola Shuboale. We begin with an update on the situation in Ukraine on day 133 of Russia's invasion. Residents have been told to leave Ukraine's eastern city of Slovyansk a day after 2 people were killed in a Russian attack on a market. Civilians boarded minibuses earlier today as Russian forces advanced from the north and east. UK Defense Intelligence say there's a realistic possibility the battle for Slovyansk would be the next key contest in the struggle for Donbass.
Russian forces struck targets across Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region on Tuesday evening to prepare the path for an expected armored thrust to take more territory. A market in the city of Slovyansk was struck by Russian forces, killing at least 2 people and injuring 7, according to officials. Smoke billowed from an auto supply shop and flames engulfed rows of market stalls.
We were sitting and counting. We counted how many there were, and then the rocket launcher system started coming in. You don't hear them flying. Only when they hit the ground, they make this whoosh sound. And then they were guns. The cannonballs you hear when they are coming.
The Ukraine Defense Ministry says it does not target residential areas, and it says it had used what it called high-precision weapons to destroy command centers and artillery in Donetsk. The capture of the Ukrainian city of Lysychansk on Sunday, July the 3rd, means all of Luhansk region is now in Russian hands, fulfilling one of Moscow's main war goals. Now Russian forces are aiming to take full control of Donetsk, the other regions in Donbass. Since the outset of the conflict, Russia has demanded that Ukraine hand both Luhansk and Donetsk to Moscow-backed separatists who have declared their independence. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Monday that despite Ukraine's withdrawal from Lysychansk, its troops continue to fight. The governor of Luhansk said Ukrainian forces which retreated from Lysychansk at the weekend took up new defensive lines in Donetsk on Tuesday. Both sides have suffered heavy casualties in the fight for Luhansk.
The VOA's Anna Chenikova joins us now for more on the situation in the country. Anna, we hear that most civilians have been evacuated from the eastern city of Slovyansk earlier today. Where are they headed to? And do we know, have any idea if any civilians are still left behind?
Good evening. Yes, actually today was the first day of the organized evacuation. We know that today a lot of people left to the area of Rivne, which is in the west part of Ukraine. We know that tomorrow it is planned that people would be evacuated to Lviv, and day after tomorrow to Rivne region again. So mostly we can say that most of the people will go to the west. Maybe some people would stop if they have some relatives or friends. Maybe they will stop somewhere in Dnipro region or a little bit farther. But organized evacuation is happening to the west. We know that out of 100,000 people who normally live in Slovyansk, 23,000 remain in the city. This, evacuation encouragements from the local authorities were already heard for a couple of months now, and especially for a couple of last weeks. Local authorities were asking people to actually leave and save their lives. Unfortunately, a lot of people were, waiting for the very last moment to leave home because, well, this is their home and the whole life behind. So now the situation is much more dangerous, but still evacuation is happening. And for the moment, it's more or less successful.
And Anna, how close are the Russian forces to the city? What are you hearing?
According to the latest reports by the Ukrainian intelligence, Russian forces are now around 16 kilometers away from Sloviansk. I would remind that Sloviansk is Donetsk region, and it's one of the main cities that is under the target for the moment in Donetsk region. So it's one of the biggest which is left. Another one is Kramatorsk. So these two cities would be, under very intensified fire for the next weeks or maybe months. We'll see how this would go. And this is just around 30 kilometers away from the city of Izum, which is occupied since the beginning of March. So Russian forces are trying to advance. Again, we know that Ukrainian forces are fighting successfully in that area. So we will see how these proceedings would continue or not.
And if the city was to be captured, this would mean all of Luhansk region is now in Russian hands, right?
Well, Sloviansk is Donetsk region already. Lysychansk was the last big city more or less, big city in Luhansk region. So we can say that most of Luhansk region is now already under Russian control. There are some villages remaining under Ukrainian control, or even better, maybe I think to say, and more correctly to say, it's kind of a gray zone. So basically, mostly Luhansk region is under Russian control already. But Sloviansk now it's so-called, next stage of Russian advance, if we can call it this way, because this is Donetsk region, and this is one of the biggest cities and one of the central cities now in Donetsk.
And how prepared are the Ukrainian forces for this fight for the eastern region? And is the military planning to recapture the areas taken by the Russians over the weekend, or are they withdrawing completely for now?
In this area, there are battalions and servicemen located who have experience in this war since 2014. So it's quite experienced teams and servicemen. We know that all of them remain in the area, and all of them are getting ready for a huge fight for Donetsk region. Of course, Ukrainian forces has no plans to withdraw or to give away territories, and all the territories which are now occupied, of course, are planning to be returned and deoccupied and liberated. So it's no territory in Ukraine at the moment which is now under occupation, which is not in the future plans to be liberated.
Okay, just last week, Russia hit Kyiv for the first time in weeks. What's the situation in the rest of the country now? Are we still seeing heavy fighting?
The most difficult situation, as we already discussed, is in Donetsk region, of course. Also, Kharkiv region is under very intensified and constant shelling. Very difficult situation in Mykolaiv region, which is south. So we know that there are certain actions happening in Kherson region. Actions from the Ukrainian military, but again, we don't have any confirmations yet, but we just hear that there are certain, movements of the Ukrainian forces. So, and Mykolaiv region is very close to Odessa region, and Russian forces also constantly shell this area. But it's not going to be correct to say that the rest of Ukraine is safe, because Kyiv was quite silent in terms of air raid sirens for 6 days, but then day before yesterday and yesterday, air raid sirens came back, and the danger came back as well, more danger, Also yesterday, the area of Khmelnytsky region, which is in the west, was under missile shelling, and the west areas are considered more or less safe. So basically, the whole territory is under danger, under more or less constant attacks, but of course, more danger and more missile strikes are happening in the east and in the south.
All right then, VOA's Anna Chenikova, thank you so much for the updates and do stay safe.
Thank you.
In other developments, large numbers of civilian casualties and massive destruction to civilian infrastructure caused by attacks conducted by Russian armed forces and on a much lower scale also by Ukrainian armed forces are not in compliance with international humanitarian law. This is a result of a report presented by the top human rights official, Michelle Bachelet, at the Human Rights Council in Geneva. The report examines the human rights situation in Ukraine in the context of the armed attack by the Russian Federation, covering the period between the 24th of February and the 15th of May 2022. The findings are based on information gathered by the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine during 11 field visits to 3 places of detention, and 517 interviews with victims and witnesses of human rights violations, as well as other sources of information.
The high numbers of civilian casualties and the extent of destruction caused to civilian infrastructure continue to raise significant concerns that attacks conducted by Russian armed forces are not complying with IHLO. While on the much lower scale, it also appears likely that Ukrainian armed forces did not fully comply with IHL in eastern parts of the country. While we have yet to be provided with access to territory occupied by Russian armed forces, we document violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law committed by all parties, and we remain fully committed to monitoring the human rights situations across the entire territory of Ukraine. Most of the documented civilian casualties were caused by the use of explosive weapons in populated areas. Shelling from heavy artillery, such as multiple launch rocket systems and missile and airstrikes, including weapons that can carry cluster munitions, were used repeatedly.
Russia's occupation of Crimea in 2014 and today's full-scale war against Ukraine are a part of one chain of events. They are a total disregard for international law and human rights. Justice can be restored only through accountability for the perpetrators of these crimes and full restoration of the territorial integrity of my country. We call upon the international community to work hard towards these goals.
And now Ukraine has asked Turkey to help investigate 3 Russian-flagged ships as part of Kyiv's efforts to probe what it alleges is the theft of grain from Russian-occupied territory, according to official documents. In a June 13 letter, the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office asked Turkey's Justice Ministry to investigate and provide evidence on the 3 named ships it suspects have been involved in transporting grain allegedly stolen from recently occupied Ukrainian territories, such as Kherson. The letter says the ships traveled from Crimea's main grain terminal in Sevastopol in April and May and pressed Ankara to obtain documentation about their cargo and arrival at Turkish ports. Russia annexed Crimea in 2014. Meanwhile, Russia's foreign ministry says that reports the Russian-flagged cargo ship Zebek Zoli was detained in the Turkish port of Karasu on suspicion of carrying stolen Ukrainian grain are false. Foreign Ministry spokesman Alexei Zaystev said the ship is simply undergoing standard procedures. Ukraine's ambassador to Turkey had said on Sunday that Turkish authorities had detained the ship. And Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has met with his Vietnamese counterpart and called on all parties in the world to make efforts to protect international laws as the world is evolving in a complicated manner. His comments come as Russia has been accused by Western countries of breaching international law through its invasion of Ukraine. European leaders have urged Moscow to abide by an order by the International Court of Justice telling Russia to withdraw from Ukraine. Vietnam and Russia have close ties dating back to the Soviet era, and Hanoi has so far not condemned Russia's war in Ukraine, which Moscow calls a special military operation. The Russian foreign minister is due to fly on to Indonesia to attend a meeting of G20 foreign ministers this week. Since Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky officially called for help from international volunteers, some 20,000 volunteers have reported for duty in the Ukrainian armed forces. But these volunteers aren't only helping on the battle line. Let's meet Nils Thal, a German firefighter who was given up holidaying in Thailand to volunteer for work on the front line in Ukraine's Kharkiv.
Nils Thal from Nuremberg in Germany felt guilty about lying on the beach in Asia while the war was going on in Ukraine. He says he tried to volunteer to help refugees in neighboring European countries, but was frustrated at the amount of bureaucracy involved. So he volunteered to help Ukrainian firefighters as they tackle burning buildings and search for survivors under the rubble caused by Russia's war.
I felt like kind of guilty laying in Thailand at a beach and something like this is going on. And this is why I decided to come here, to help directly at the route and not like far behind in the NATO territory where everything is fine.
Tal, who is now on a sabbatical from his job back home, says his father had initially tried to persuade him not to go to the war zone. Now he says that once his sabbatical is over, he will try to get unpaid leave in order to return to Ukraine.
In the beginning, my father said, don't do it. Just stay in Poland or drive a truck or anything and do whatever you want, but do it here in Europe and take care about the refugees, for example. And for me it was like plenty of people are doing that. If we want to live in a civilized world, we have to do something. That's it. And I'm kind of proud to stay on the right side of the history here.
Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, suffered heavy bombardment in the first few months of the war. But weeks of relative calm have recently been broken by renewed shelling. On Monday, Russian forces shelled Kharkiv central district, killing 5 people and wounding 22, according to Ukrainian authorities.
The release of WNBA star Brittney Griner from Russian detention is a priority for the Biden administration, and that's according to the White House press secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. She also says President Joe Biden has received a letter from Griner. It was sent by her representatives to the White House and appealed to President Biden for help to bring her home. She was taken into custody at a Moscow airport on February the 17th when a search of her luggage allegedly revealed multiple cannabis oil vape cartridges. She was charged with internationally importing narcotics into Russia in a trial that began last week. If convicted, she faces up to 10 years in a Russian prison.
So I can say that the president did read the letter. I was there when he read the letter. This is something, Brittney Griner being held in Moscow, we believe the Federation is she's being wrongfully detained in Moscow at this time. This is an issue that is a priority for this president. As you have heard us say before, he believes that any U.S. national that is held abroad or detained or held hostage abroad, we need to bring back safely, and we are going to use every tool that we possibly can to make that happen. Again, this is a priority for the president. I do want to share that on Saturday, Mrs. Griner spoke with National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. That is their second call in the past about 10 days that they have spoken. Secretary Blinken also spoke with Mrs. Griner as well recently. I don't have anything else to read out as far as a potential call or a meeting with her family, but clearly we believe she is wrongfully detained. We believe she needs to come home. She should be home, as well as Paul Whelan as well, who's being held, and any other U.S. nationals who is being wrongfully detained abroad.
And still to come on The World Today. Former British Health Minister Sajid Javid delivers parting blow to Prime Minister Boris Johnson, says enough is enough. More details in a moment. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us on The World Today. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is fighting to save his premiership amid a mass walkout of ministers over his leadership. At Prime Minister's questions earlier today, he said he had a colossal mandate from the 2019 election and would keep going. But a slew of ministers from his party are continuing to quit government or party positions, with backbenchers also withdrawing their support. At least 34 ministers and aide have resigned so far. The resignation started on Tuesday evening following a scandal involving Prime Minister Johnson's appointment of a now former government lawmaker who has been subject of several complaints of sexual misconduct. Well, let's listen in from the session earlier where the Prime Minister faced tough questions in Parliament.
Sentences in this morning. Mr. Speaker, I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I expect I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you. A government minister was accused of sexually assaulting a young man. I want to quote the victim's account. He says, "He grabbed my arse and then he slowly moved his hand down in front of my groin. I froze." I accept that's not easy listening, but it's a reminder to all those propping up this Prime Minister just how serious the situation is. He knew the accused minister had previously committed predatory behaviour, but he promoted him to a position of power anyway. Why?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, that individual, the honourable member for Tamworth, no longer has the Conservative whip. He no longer has a job. He is no longer, as soon as I was made aware of the allegation that he has just read out, Mr. Speaker, and the complaint that was made, he lost his status as a Conservative MP, and he is now the subject, Mr. Speaker, of an independent investigation to the Complaints and Grievances panel. And that is entirely right. And I want to say to him, Mr. Speaker, I want to say to him that I abhor bullying and abuse of power anywhere in Parliament, in this party or in any other party.
Well, as established, Prime Minister MPs are angry at the Prime Minister's handling of sexual misconduct claims against former Deputy Chief Whip Chris Pincher. Prime Minister Johnson has insisted he won't leave number 10 despite the growing protest. There are calls for the rules of the 1922 Committee of Conservative MPs to be changed to allow another confidence vote in the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister think there are any circumstances in which he should resign?
I think, Mr. Speaker, clearly if there were circumstances in which I felt it was impossible for the government to go on and discharge the mandate that we've been given, or if I felt, for instance, that we were being frustrated in our desire to support the Ukrainian people, or over some major point, then I would. But frankly, Mr. Speaker, the job of a Prime Minister in difficult circumstances when he's been handed a colossal mandate is to keep going, and that's what I'm going to do.
What a pathetic spectacle. Exactly. The dying act of his political career is to parrot that nonsense. Yep. And as for those who are left, only in office because no one else is prepared to debase themselves any longer, the charge of the lightweight brigade. Have some self-respect. Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, it's exactly when times are tough and when the country faces pressures on the economy and pressures on their budgets, Mr. Speaker, and when we have the biggest war in Europe for 80 years, Mr. Speaker, that is exactly the moment that you'd expect a government to continue with its work, not to walk away, Mr. Speaker, and to get on with our job and to focus on the things that matter to the people of this country.
And former British Health Minister Sajid Javid also delivered a parting blow to Boris Johnson's leadership today, telling him and his fellow lawmakers in their ruling Conservative Party that it's time for the Prime Minister to resign. Javid stepped down on Tuesday evening in what became the first of a flurry of resignations of ministers who said they had lost confidence in Prime Minister Johnson and that he was not fit to govern.
Now, when I last gave a personal statement from this seat, I spoke about the importance of institutions and conventions. Today, it is about the importance of integrity. And don't worry, there's not going to be a series of these. Institutions and integrity are both central pillars that underpin our great democracy. It doesn't matter what your political perspective is in this House. I believe that we are all motivated by the national interest and that the public expects us all of us, to maintain honesty and to maintain integrity in whatever we do. This is not an abstract matter. We've seen in great democracies what happens when divisions are entrenched and not bridged. We cannot allow that to happen here. We must bring the country together as one nation. Effective governance inevitably requires loyalty and collective responsibility. Of course it does. And I'm instinctively a team player. And I have completely focused on governing effectively over the last year. But treading the tightrope between loyalty and integrity has become impossible in recent months. And Mr. Speaker, I will never risk losing my integrity. I also believe a team is as good as its team captain, and that a captain is as good as his or her team. So loyalty must go both ways. The events of recent months have made it increasingly difficult to be in that team.
Our correspondent Juliana Olainka has been following every detail since the first wave of resignations were announced last night. She joins us now on the program for more. Juliana, a lot has happened in just a few hours. It seems the number of resignations keep going up by the minute. What's the latest?
They do, Tenny, and since you've been on air, there have actually been 36 MPs that have resigned. And I've got to tell you, I haven't felt this type of political anxiety or a political vacuum in the country since the morning after the Brexit referendum on June the 27th. That's just how tense it is at the moment. And anybody who is aware of the British media or how the British MPs go up at it against each other, it has been quite uncomfortable at times. And so much has happened, you're right, since PMQs at 12 o'clock. That clip you were just playing does feel like it's been 24 hours away. Just to update you about what's happening now, just after PMQs, the Prime Minister sat in front of a 2-hour grueling liaison committee where he shrugged off any suggestion that he would be resigning. Back and forth, MPs from across the House, including Labour MPs and his own MPs, were asking him about public standards in life. And this wasn't just about Chris Pincher and the serious sexual misconduct and sexual harassment allegations that have been put against his MPs over the past couple of months. They also spoke about Priti Patel and bullying and just the general degrading of the standards of life in Parliament. Now, whilst that was going on, we did hear that there are, I believe, about 8 cabinet ministers, including the newly announced Chancellor of the Exchequer, Nadhim Zahawi, Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, the Business Secretary, all waiting at number 10, basically to tell the Prime Minister that it is time to go. And if that indeed is the truth, then it is impossible for him to continue. 36 MPs have resigned from government in the past 24 hours. Who is going to fill these positions? The Prime Minister was asked that during the liaison committee session, and he said there are a thrust of young MPs on the backbenchers that could do that. But if his top team go, then really there is no more for him to do. But it's really difficult to try and judge the situation because, of course, nothing like this has ever happened before. And the Prime Minister, despite how incredibly difficult it has been for him today, just doesn't want to bow out. He is a man that is not going to leave literally without a fight.
Yeah, and you know, he has vowed to stay on. He says he has a mandate to fulfill from the 2019 elections. But what's the response from Britons with everything that has happened so far?
Like I said, it does feel like there is just so much political anxiety in the air at the moment. Whether or not the Prime Minister would like to admit it, there is no functioning government. You know, if we take a step back and look at what's happening, I believe just a couple of hours ago, British Airways announced that they'll be cancelling about 10,000 flights because there is a huge backlog at the airports at the moment. There are protests taking place up and down the country because of the cost of fuel, which is skyrocketing. We are currently going through the worst cost of living crisis in more than a generation. Most people just want to get on and try and get some support from the government so that they can feed their families and get a decent wage when they go to work. We're not able to do that because the government is just so consumed with Boris Johnson's scandal, and it's one thing after another after another. It's not just Partygate, it's not just bullying, it's not just sexual harassment. There was also a couple of months ago, we were talking about the £100,000 refurbishment at the flat above number 11, where he resides with his wife. So I think people are definitely sick to the back teeth. There was also a survey conducted by YouGov where 69% of those polled said they wanted the Prime Minister to resign. But I do also think it's really important to talk about the silent majority, Tenny. And there are a silent majority of people in this country who just want the Prime Minister to stay. They do like him. They are still supporting him. But at the moment, it's very difficult to see whether or not Boris Johnson will survive the next hour, will survive the next 24 hours. It's difficult to say, but it has been rather uncomfortable and very unsavoury at times, but jaw-gripping, I must say, as well.
All right, Juliana, a lot to keep our eyes on. Thank you so much for bringing us up to speed. And to other stories now, there is no legal or political justification whatsoever for Britain to change the Northern Ireland Protocol that was part of its divorce agreement with the European Union. That's according to the bloc's post-Brexit negotiator. European Commissioner Maros Sefcovic says there's a need to be realistic as no alternative solution has been found.
President, the UK government tabled the so-called Northern Ireland Protocol Bill on the 13th of June. If adopted, this bill would disapply most provisions of the protocol, and this is unacceptable. There is no legal or political justification whatsoever for the UK to unilaterally change an international agreement. So we need to be realistic. No alternative solution has been found, and it is not needed. From the very beginning, we have shown a lot of understanding for the practical difficulties in the implementation of the protocol, and we demonstrated that solutions can be found within its framework.
And a man accused of opening fire on a 4th of July parade near Chicago has been charged with 7 counts of murder. The attack in Highland Park left 7 people dead and more than 30 others injured. If convicted, the 7 murder counts alone would carry a sentence of life in prison without parole. The suspect, Robert Cremo, is accused of firing 70 bullets from a high-powered rifle down onto the crowd and disguising himself as a woman so he could escape alongside fleeing victims.
Today, the Lake County State's Attorney's Office has charged Robert Cremo III with 7 counts of first-degree murder for the killing spree that he has unleashed against our community. These are just the first of many charges that will be filed against Mr. Cremo. I want to emphasize that. There will be more charges. We anticipate dozens of more charges centering around each of the victims. Psychological victims, physical victims, attempt murder charges, aggravated discharge charges, aggravated battery charges. There will be dozens of more charges against Mr. Crimo. We continue to work with our federal partners to understand every aspect of this well-orchestrated and carefully planned crime. Tomorrow morning at the Lake County Courthouse, we will ask a judge to hold Mr. Crimo without the possibility of bail.
We will continue to deploy our federal resources in collaboration with these state and local partners to ensure that individuals who commit horrific acts of violence like this using firearms are held accountable.
And over in Australia, rivers remain swollen and streets flooded, even as the wild storm system that has pounded several parts of Sydney with torrential rain for 4 days move away from the city. More than 85,000 people in New South Wales, most in Sydney's western suburbs, have been asked to either evacuate or warned they might receive evacuation orders, up from Tuesday's 50,000. Even as floodwaters receded in some parts of Sydney, Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese urges residents to listen to authorities' instructions.
To evacuate.
Currently, we have 108 evacuation orders in place. We have 56 evacuation warnings. Now, that's affecting around 85,000 people across New South Wales. That's up from 50,000 yesterday.
In some good news, the rain is starting to ease across Sydney and those floodwaters are just starting to recede. But all of the river systems right across the Sydney Basin are still full, and many of them still at a major flood level, particularly down through the Hawkesbury Nepean area.
Still ahead on The World Today. Have more on the weather as heavy rainfall brings Indian city of Mumbai to a standstill. There's at least 4 missing after heavy rainfall in the north. More details in a moment. Stay with us. And it's that time of the year again when heavy rainfall in the Indian city of Mumbai and nearby areas have disrupted the lives of millions of people in the country's financial capital. Many parts of the city remain inundated in waist-deep water as incessant rains lash the city, causing flooding. India's weather department has issued an orange alert for the city and its neighboring districts, predicting heavy to very heavy rainfall over the next 5 days. Teams of the National Disaster Response Force, a specialized force that responds to life-threatening disasters in the country, have been deployed in the city as a precautionary measure. Monsoon rains are common in Maharashtra state, where Mumbai is located, around this time of the year. They're also central to the lives of people, shaping the fortunes of millions of farmers who rely on the rains to grow their produce. Meanwhile, 4 people are missing after heavy rainfall triggered flash floods in India's northern Kulu district in the Himachal Pradesh state. And back here in Nigeria, President Muhammadu Buhari has visited Kuje prison in Abuja hours after bandits attacked the correctional facility. His visit to the Kuje Custodial Center comes after Tuesday's terrorist attack on the facility. The terrorists attacked the center and freed inmates, including 64 of their members held in the custody during the attack. Earlier, during a visit to the facility after last night's attack, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Interior, Mr. Shoaibu Belgo, explained that about 600 inmates escaped from the facility, while over 300 of them had been retrieved and more on the way. Mr. Belgo adds that the facility holds 994 inmates, and the attackers, whom he suspects are Boko Haram terrorists, attacked the facility to rescue their co-conspirators.
The inmates here, 994 is the population of inmates, and when they broke out with approximately, because these people came specifically, we understand their Boko Haram, they came specifically for their co-conspirators, and but in order to get them, some of them are in general population, so they broke out, and other people in that general population escaped as well. But many of them have returned. They have reported themselves to the police. Some have returned. Some we have successfully retrieved from the bushes where they are hiding. And right now, at least we have retrieved about 300 out of about 600 that got out of the jail cells. And the retrieval is going on. We receive reports that there are still about 50, 60 that have been intercepted somewhere just a little outside town here. And you will have heard the helicopters hovering overhead. They are locating the different locations where these people are. The military checkpoints and police checkpoints from here to Abaji, from here to Suleja, from here to town, everywhere, everybody is on high alert. And the inmates are being retrieved even as we speak. We don't know how many were killed among the attackers, but it's quite possible that they took their injured and other casualties with them. But on our side, just one death and about 3 injuries.
And over in South Africa, it's a day of mourning as the country holds a mass funeral of 21 young people who died at Enyubeni Tavern in the Eastern Cape province of the country 10 days ago. 19 empty coffins were brought to the ceremony. This is as families of those who passed asked for a private funeral. A family that lost 2 of their daughters to the tragedy buried their daughters on Tuesday. President Cyril Ramaphosa, along with other ministers, attended the ceremony held in a giant tent at Scenery Park.
Dressed in black, singing and dancing to solemn gospel songs in front of 19 coffins, South African mourners gathered in the coastal city of East London to grieve the still mysterious deaths of 21 teenagers in a poorly ventilated local tavern 10 days ago. Officials at the funeral parlor say all coffins are empty, as police are still investigating the deaths. The remaining 2 were buried separately by their families. Some mourners broke down and wept, while others hung their heads solemnly. President Cyril Ramaphosa was in attendance alongside other government officials, friends, relatives, and about 3,000 people. The incident in a popular night spot in Scenery Park Township outside the city of East London at the end of last month has provoked an outpouring of sorrow and much soul-searching in a nation accustomed to frequent injuries from a heavy drinking culture. The youngest victim was a 13-year-old girl. Forensic teams investigating how the youths died have yet to reveal their conclusions. The most likely cause appears to be some kind of chemical or gas leak on the ground floor of the venue, which was packed and had little ventilation. Another theory authorities have been investigating is that they were poisoned by something they ate, drank, or smoked. Some of the survivors admitted to hospital complained of chest pains. Others spoke of trying to leave in panic as people dropped dead around them, but being unable to find an exit. Residents have protested outside the tavern, which they say they had been asking authorities to close. Its license was revoked last week.
And on a lighter note, as we end the program, Kenyan singer and budding Nollywood actress Habida Maloney, who has lived in 7 different countries, has just made her 8th stop in the UAE. The MTV Mama awardee has hit the ground running by scoring her first performance just weeks after relocating to the tourist hub Dubai. She speaks to Channel Television's Maiwa Adigoke about her journey and excitement to be part of Nollywood.
It's Habida's first ever performance in Dubai, having recently relocated from the United Kingdom. With over 20 years in the music industry across 8 countries, the Kenyan-born singer is still in the game, sharing her gift with the world.
When this came, I said yes. You also have to say yes to the opportunity. So for this is up my alley completely. And I'm trying, and I know this is my brand. I have songs to perform here, they make sense. So this is the path I'm on. So it's almost like this is just meeting me.
The multi-talented entertainer has lived in Kenya, United Kingdom, USA, Oman, and now UAE. The constant moving, she says, does come with its ups and downs.
Because I get bored easily. So the moving is quite exciting for me, but work-wise, it's very crippling because you build and then you have to go and build again, and then you have to leave. But now I can say South Africans know me, I can say Tanzanians know me, I can say Dubai people are gonna know me, I can say UK people know me. So it's like I'm planting seeds in little, but it's not long enough ever. I think South Africa was the furthest I got because it happened quickly, because the industry is so alive, you know. I'm waiting for Nigeria. If I go to Nigeria, I'll never leave, I think.
At age 16, she moved to the United Kingdom, where her music journey began, and then proceeded to the United States, where she obtained a degree in performing arts. A chance trip to Kenya brought her a first taste of fame with the song Sunshine, which also won an MTV Mama Award.
So I'm literally at a gas station with an old friend of mine, and he's like, you need to meet RK. And RK was one of the biggest producers at the time in Kenya. And he drives up. What do you call that? Serendipity? What do you call that? Karma? I don't know what you call that. He drove up and it was like, RK, this is Habida. Habida is RK studio tomorrow. And he was like, okay. And I went to the studio, and Nameless, who's the other person in the song, had a session after the meeting, so RK looked at him and said, you two in the studio, and that's how the song was born.
This is what I do, I do.
Many years later, Habida is now in Dubai, seeking new opportunities, making connections, and working on new music. She's also working on some movies, including Golden Stripes, a Nollywood UK production by Peace Osigbe, in which she plays the mother of a boy murdered by a gang.
I love Nigerian films. I can stay up till 6 in the morning.
Habida's enthusiasm for Nollywood is no surprise, as the mother of 2 is also married to a Nigerian national. From Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, Maya Wadegoki for Channels Television.
And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Shibowale.